Hi, I'm Pratim Ranjan Bose, and you are watching Podcast with Pratim, presented by Iravati Research and Communication Center, or IRCC. I have with me Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. Ambassador is India's former envoy to Canada and Pakistan. He is a distinguished fellow of the Observer Research Foundation and a corporate strategist. Sir, Justin Trudeau has resigned as Prime Minister of Canada. He will not lead Liberal Party in the next election due in October this year. His coalition partner, New Democratic Party of Jagmeet Singh, withdrew support last year. According to a recent opinion poll, Conservative Party led by Pierre Poliver should win the next election handsomely. Liberal Party will decide on its next leader in March. Now, there are many questions. First is why Trudeau became so unpopular, even within the party, and whether the election of Donald Trump in the USA has anything to do with his resignation as is popularly perceived. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pratim. Good to join you on your show. About Trudeau, we need to remember that he is also sitting on 9 years of anti-incumbency. So the elections are coming after almost a decade. And in any case, he was facing a good deal of anti-incumbency. But there is an overlay in that of some governance failures and a lot of errors of judgment. So Trudeau had become, as you said, increasingly unpopular, and the Conservatives on current reckoning clearly have an upper hand in the 2025 elections. As of now, Trudeau has said that he would resign both as the uh, president of the prime minister and the leader of his Liberal Party. But what we can expect is an election, the latest by October, but almost certainly in the summer, because when the parliament meets in March, it's been prorogued till March. It's unlikely that the Liberals would have an interim prime minister just for a few months, and it's more likely that elections would be announced and be held in the summer. So we are looking at a change of regime then, and in many ways, it's very interesting that the story you are watching in Canada runs parallel to the kind of story you watched in 2024 in the US, because you had the leader of a liberal Democratic Party, Biden, who wanted to continue and become the candidate for the party in the next election against a very serious challenge from the opposition, in that case, Trump, in this case, the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, but refusing to let go until an internal sort of revolt in his party pushed him out. It took in the US, it took Obama to tell Biden to leave. In Canada, Chrystia Freeland, his deputy, resigned, and that precipitated matters. And of course, the arrival of Donald Trump perhaps hastened it, and particularly the misguided visit that Trudeau made to Florida to try and get a deal out of Donald Trump, but came back only humiliated, with Trump mocking him and calling him the governor of the 51st state. So I think this was a parallel kind of development, but what Trudeau faced was a consequence of some of his misjudgments and also the strong anti-incumbency.
Okay, so one thing I'm just clarifying. So you think there will not be a change of prime minister till the election, right?
Well, certainly not till March when the parliament meets. Then potentially there could be a change in prime minister, but he could be asked to continue by the Liberals till the elections are held. Or the alternative scenario is that the parliament is held. There's a non-confidence motion. Trudeau's government falls, and then elections are held in due course. But the Liberals could also change the leader and have a interim prime minister for a while. So all the scenarios can play out, but the likeliest, I would argue, is that elections will be held very quickly after March, where there could be a non-confidence motion or even a resignation by the government and calling for immediate elections.
I mean, it's just an observation, not a question. I mean, we are witnessing, we are in a very interesting era when the domestic politics is impacting the foreign relations substantially. I think the tendency has gone up. I don't know about, I mean, that is what we see at least. Now, just a question is, what is behind the Trump-Trudeau conflict? Why did he make it so bad with the US, and why did he involve into it? And how serious is this call by President Trump to make Canada the 51st state of USA alongside the proposed territorial expansion to Greenland and Panama Canal? I mean, is this merely a rhetoric or there is something behind?
Well, there's a lot of rhetoric there. There is also a lot of history there. So, Trump and Trudeau didn't get along even in the earlier Trump 1.0 from 2017 to 20. And Trudeau, for Trump, there have been several gripes in the relationship with Canada. He believes that the relationship, the US is being taken for a ride. He, of course, has famously said that he would have a 25% duty on both tariff duty on both Canada and Mexico. And, that would be disastrous, certainly for the Canadian economy, because there's $1 billion of trade. There's a relatively smaller deficit, $40 billion compared to $280 billion or so with China. But what Trump feels is that there is a problem with human trafficking and also drugs coming in from both Canada and Mexico. But to answer your question, I don't think the threat to make Canada the 51st state is a serious one. It's a lot of hype. It's typical Trumpism, where you hype up one particular issue and use it as a negotiating ploy. You get the eyeballs from it. Trump has very clearly ruled out a military invasion of Canada. In fact, we are talking of this new era of Akhand America, the American expansionism, which is being talked about, of that Canada, Panama, even Greenland, in Denmark. And I think of all these three expansionist ideas or ideas of territory, the most serious one is relating to Greenland and Denmark, because there, I think the US deep state also has deep interests in acquiring that territory, perhaps for fear of the Chinese and Russians getting a foothold in that strategic region and wanting to expand the American base and military presence in Greenland. But there is no such rationale here in Canada. So it is simply a threat. What Trump sees it as an economic problem. And it's certainly, something that might come out in the 25 presidential orders that are expected to issue on January 20th, soon after he's sworn in. So that is a real and present danger or of a tariff war, because Canada is debating how to retaliate. But that danger exists, and I think one of territorial expansion doesn't exist at all.
So how does USA gain now by imposing such stiff tariff on its, because majority of the imports are, I mean, the majority of the trade is energy and auto. That is what I saw from, that is what data set tells me. So how does US gain? I mean, well, I understand it's a big economy and it will try to crush Canada, which is mostly export driven. So what is the game behind?
Well, conversations between Canada and US and even Mexico are not new. As you know, they have the NAFTA and now called the CUSMA, Canada, US, Mexico trade arrangement.
Right.
And this has been negotiated even during the last Trump regime, where Chrystia Freeland, who was Trudeau's finance minister and deputy PM, she was the designated point person to have that conversation. And in fact, her resignation came as a result of a difference in policy on how to deal with this upcoming challenge. Or in Trump's narrative, the Canadians are taking advantage of the Americans. He feels that of the $1 billion of trade, although the deficit is small, it's just about $40 billion, they are importing a lot of US Canadian cars, for instance, vehicles. And he feels that somehow that is to the detriment of Detroit, where the cars should be manufactured in US manufacturing, auto components certainly, and oil as well. Now, on Canada's part, Canada is bracing for impact right now. So what they're trying to do, and they had a meeting yesterday of all the premiers of the 13 provinces, along with Trudeau in Ottawa. So they are trying to form a Team Canada approach. And even in this, they have holdouts. For instance, Doug Ford, who's the Premier of Ontario, believes in a hardline approach that they should have retaliatory tariffs. They should have, if there are 400 million barrels of oil imported from Canada to the US every day. And if there's a tariff on that oil, as you was, alluding, that itself will lead to higher prices in the US. But if there's the Canadians have leverage in terms of being able to stop or curtail that flow of oil and the export of electricity, for instance. So they have certain levers in their hands and they want to use this full spectrum of measures aggressively. But there's a holdout. One of the premiers of Alberta, the new premier, Danielle Smith, she feels differently. And she feels that this aggression is not called for. So, there is a disagreement even in Canada on this.
Yeah, I understand it's connected to that Make America Great Again campaign. Now, uh, you just touched upon that human trafficking and drugs issue. We have a relation with both in India, particularly in Canada. Mexico is the route for illegal immigration to Canada, sorry, US, but Canada is a serious problem to us, or at least that is what came to light. Now, how does all these things, how should it reflect on India-Canada relationship? Trudeau had almost bombed a very steady relationship between the two countries. Unprecedented things have happened. So, and all happened for probably for wrong causes. So how should you expect things to resolve? And is there a chance for early resolution of the diplomatic standoff? Uh, Over to you, sir.
Yes, so in the bilateral relationship, I think Trudeau has done some long-term damage to the relationship by a series of misjudgments. And I think in the Trudeau era, there were not just the recent episode of the last 18 months, but even earlier, Trudeau had waded into the Indian internal farmers' protest issue by making statements then. His visit to India, even in the early times in 2018, was not very successful because he was trying to please sections of the diaspora in Canada. So essentially, what Canada was doing is that rather than aligning its foreign policy to its national interests, it was doing so to narrow voter banks and diaspora interests. And really speaking, he was playing to the gallery of certain diaspora, which he was trying to please, or in his mind, he thought he would get their votes or get their attention by doing what he did with India. And what we saw, particularly in the last 18 months, was a precipitation of a crisis that he personally took on, standing up in parliament and making those allegations about India and saying that there was credible evidence available and so on, that he mishandled a security issue which he should not have personally handled at the political level, but allowed his security teams to handle whatever the merit of the allegations. And unlike the US, which handled it in a much more mature way, and we saw the outcomes of that till yesterday, that they shared that credible evidence with India. India did its own inquiry, and India found a person who was earlier in government guilty of doing this plotting. And he was removed. That person was removed from government, and this was transparently shared with the Americans. In the Canadian case, on this particular allegation of the murder of a Canadian citizen, there was no credible evidence that was presented to India. So that became a sort of problem. But the political problem was even more severe. That rather than handling this issue in as a security problem in an otherwise fine relationship, it was made to be the only problem or a huge political problem. And that created a lot of bad blood and led to a series of erroneous decisions, including that of expelling the Indian High Commissioner and top diplomats in late 2024. So I think it was some misjudgments. And for India, India was playing the long game and saw this as a Trudeau problem and a Trudeau government problem, rather than a Canada problem where larger interests are aligned in terms of the strong economic partnership, the strong people-to-people partnership, and the geopolitical interests of looking at the Indo-Pacific.
That is interesting. I mean, Trudeau somehow tried to give the feeling that Canada is USA. I mean, that kind of a very high-handed approach to things, and even during a lot of controversies, even during his G20 visit. So where he overstayed and all these things happened. Do you think? I mean, just ending this. Do you think that this taking domestic problems outside? I mean, this new trend of taking domestic problems outside, it will persist for some time. Not only in terms of Canada, but overall in diplomatic world.
Well, in diplomacy and in foreign relations, it often happens that a domestic issue takes on an international dimension, typically with your neighbors. We've seen that in the case of Bangladesh, we've seen it in the case of Sri Lanka, even Nepal, and sometimes to an extent Pakistan. But unusual to have your domestic issues guiding relations, even with distant neighbors, which is what I think it was the error that Canada made under Trudeau, that its foreign policy was not expressing Canada's own national interests, but Trudeau's personal interest of personal survival and his understanding of diaspora vote banks. For instance, his trip to Florida to go and personally try and get a victory out of negotiating with Trump was a misguided one, and it backfired. In retrospect, the way he dealt with India was an attempt to up his political capital and somehow survive this leadership challenge that he was going to face, and somehow make that into an issue that he had dealt with India in somehow a muscular way. And similarly, the way he dealt with China and other issues. So I think it's particularly exaggerated the way domestic issues were used for not just for foreign policy, but for promoting one leader's personal stock in his country. And I think that's a huge mistake, and it has damaged Canada's national interest in the longer term.
Yeah, thanks to you for touching upon that China issue. He almost ruffled every feather under the sun. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for giving time. Thanks.
Thank you, Pratim. Thank you. Great to be on your show.